Okay, class, I'm going to pick up where we left off and complete the worksheet. The workbook has quite a number of columns, and we're using, some basic functions. We're going to get a little bit more complex in this particular example, so let's take our time and go through. When you look at this spreadsheet, I am working in the percent of portfolio section of the workbook. And what I want to do right now is calculate the short or long-term indicator for each one of the investment types by putting in an if function. So before I go any further, I want to make sure I get everything out of that cell that doesn't belong there. Delete that. And so to do that, you can use the formula function that's located on your Excel workbook home screen. Click on the function that you want to use. I'm going to use a logical function. I'm going to use an if function. And I am really truly interested in one cell. And that cell I'm going to evaluate is going to be the number of months that particular asset has been owned. I'm having a hard time moving it out of the way so I can click onto it. So I'm clicking on the Q4, and the reason why is because I want to be able to test the length of time that the assets were held and compare it with an indicator. In this case, it's going to be 12 months because 12 months or longer is considered long term. So I'm going to tell it if that cell is greater than or equal to 12, it's going to be a long-term investment. So watch as I continue. Okay, so that means the logical test makes it true. If it's true, what do I want to put in that cell? You need to tell it at this point, what do you want to put in the cell if it's true, and what do you want to put in the cell if it's false? So if it's true, I want to say long. But if it's false, I wanted to tell it it's short. And again, the computer is just saying, it's just taking it's just evaluating the cell and see if it meets the condition. If it meets the condition, we need to tell it to do something. We can't just say, well, if it's true, okay, it's true, because it's going to just type in the word true. We don't want to say that. We want to say, if it's true, this is what I want you to tell me. If it's false, this is what I want you to tell me. So the true or false indicators need to be assigned to some kind of response on our end. So in these two cells here, I'm just telling it, if it's true, this is what I want it to say. If it's false, this is what I want it to say. So I'm going to click on, in this case, the OK button to see if it gives me the right answer. And it does. And generally, this is, sometimes you don't really want to put in a value. You just want to say if it's true or false. But in this case, we want to say whether or not it's true or false, and we want to say what we want the cell to do, what we want to have in that cell if it's true or false. So the next step, then, I'm going to stop for a second, take a breather, and just go through what we've done. We have evaluated the percent of portfolio. We want to determine if the indicator of this particular asset is long or short. So we did an if function. You can do this in a different way, which is explained in your text as a different function, but we are right now talking about lookup functions and also logical functions. So this is an excellent example of how to use a logical function. Logical functions are, again, if, or, and those kinds of functions. Right now we're using the if function. And what we'll do in this case is copy this formula all the way down, all the way to the bottom, and hit enter, and it will again tell us long or short, long or short. And you can test the reasonableness of it, because if it's under 12 months, you know it's going to say short. And we see a couple here. The bond fund is short here, and another international fund is short. Just based on the logic of it, it makes sense to us. So again, when you're doing these types of worksheets, the main thing I think you need to think about is when you put a value in and you put a function in, you really need to test it with your own personal logic. Is it giving me what I'm expecting? Does this make sense? And I just tested it, and it does make sense. So now I feel confident enough to proceed forward. We don't want the spreadsheets to say things that don't make any sense. We need to challenge the spreadsheet to make certain it's reasonable and that we're getting what we're expecting to get. Because worksheets are just us putting information in. We really have to evaluate these worksheets to make them make the most sense and to be most useful. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to complete the remaining two columns, and then we'll proceed further. We're going to switch gears And we're going to go to the column X, which is the performance indicator in the performance analysis section of your workbook. This test, this logical test, is going to be working on the OR function. So I'm going to test it, go back to my logical, I'm going to use the OR, and I'm going to put in here the values that I am seeking. I'm seeking S4, which is your cell indicator, S4. And I want to say if S4 is less than 0 or W4 is less than -1%. That's what I want to tell it. Let's see if we get a response. And if it's true, we will get a response. If it's false, we get a response. And we don't want to tell it to put anything else in the space other than whether it's true or false. So we're going to click on OK here. Now what this particular cell is asking is, it's asking, I'm going to put the F2 here so that we can say, it's an either or. Is it either, if is it less than 0 or is it less than -1%? If it's less than either or, it's going to be false. Otherwise, it's going to be true. With these type of, I would say, functions, it's going to be a default with the right answer, and everything else is going to be the wrong answer. Or in this case, if it's going to be true, it has to be true in all cases. Otherwise, the system is going to flag it as being false. Computers are a difference engine. They really don't look at things the way we would think about things with that gray area. This is pretty much the true or false. That's it. And if it's true or false, do you want to put anything else in the cell? And we just want to say if it's true or false. So this OR function is not AND. So both conditions do not have to be true. Only one or the other have to be true, or one or the other have to be false. So I'm going to put an enter here, and I'm going to copy this all the way down. And see, to make certain I get the same type of results. Okay, with this function, particularly when you're using much more complicated functions, it's very important to make it make sense. Is this a true indication of our performance? Is it truly correct? And using common sense and logic before proceeding further will help you, detect errors in your formulas. And again, it's just making certain that these things make sense. We don't want to just put a formula in there and assume it's right, because computers are not going to tell you if it's wrong, because it's going to do what you tell it to do. So we've got that column completed. The next step we're going to work on in this spreadsheet, it's going to be using the AND function, and it's again is another logical test. So the next step is going to be using the AND function. The next thing we are going to do is determine if a particular investment requires a hold or a sell. And this particular function and this logical test is extremely complex. Let's take a look at it before we try to put it in. What it's asking is a number of things. It's really an AND statement, because what we want is a number of transactions to meet a certain criteria. And the first thing we want to know is, well, is the investment not negative? If it's negative, is it negative, then we want to sell it. If it's not making enough money, if it's not bringing a return, and we're using the current versus target, if the return is not higher than a certain percentage. If it is higher than a certain percentage, we hold it. If it's not, we sell it or we buy. And this logical test is going to have to go through a series of checks based on what we tell it. The first check is going to be driven by what's in cell N4. N4 is going to be the current versus the target. The second driver is going to be S4, and S4 is going to be the unrealized gain or loss. We want to see if that unrealized gain or loss meets a criteria. It's got to be greater than 0. Meaning if it's a negative number, it already kicks out. And also the N4 has to meet a criteria. It has to be less than -1. That's the first thing. The next step that it goes through is testing the N4 again, which is the current versus target, against is it greater than 1%? Because if it's less than 1%, we're going to sell it. If it's greater than 1%, we're going to buy more. If it's greater than 1% and it has been held for longer than 12 months, we want to hold it. So based on all of these different criteria, it's going to go through a series of steps to make certain that you can evaluate that stock and tell the spreadsheet what you want it to do. And this is extremely complex. So I'm going to take this particular function, I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to copy it. I think I can copy it. Let me see if I can copy it to the next cell down and see if it works. It does. I'm going to copy it down once more. Again, once you get the cell to work in the first cell, we're just going to copy and see if it, it looks okay. I'm going to click on here. Alright, so it looks fine, so I'm going to continue to do so. But the main point here I want to emphasize is this particular AND function is asking 4 different questions, and all of which have to be answered. If it's answered true, we're going to give it a buy. If it's answered false, we're going to give it something else. So the first function is if it's true, then we put buy. If it's not true, it goes to the second test. If that's not true, then it goes to hold. So if it's true, it's going to buy. Then if that's true, that first I would say that first particular question, if it's not true, then it's going to ask if N4 is greater than 1% and S4 is less or greater than or equal to 0, then that's true. And if that's true, then it will sell. But if both of these different questions are false, the only thing it can do is go to the final step and say hold. And that's what we're doing here. So the next step is going to be determining whether or not we're going to rebalance or we're going to leave it alone. So just one moment and we're going to go to the next one while I copy these cells over. The next column we're going to work on is a rebalance indicator. This rebalance indicator is just checking whether or not the target meets a certain criteria. If the target meets the greater than 1%, and we're talking about the negative 2.5, which is right in cell number N4. If it's greater than 1%, we want to rebalance it. If it's less than 1%, we want to rebalance. If it's not greater than 1% or less than a negative 1%, then the value of that cell is going to say okay. It has to meet either one of these criteria, and what we're trying to do is evaluate what's in the cell here. If this cell here that I'm highlighting is not a negative, and if it's greater than 1%, it's okay. We're not going to rebalance it. Otherwise, we're going to rebalance it. So I'm going to click on here, and it looks like yes, and it makes the logical makes sense, because if it's a negative number, clearly it needs to be rebalanced. But when you get further down and you see it's not a negative number, we'll see how it works. But I'm going to copy this down to the other cell and see what I get. Should still get the same kind of indicator. Let's just make certain here. Okay, so we have a number of investment portfolios that needs to be rebalanced. But again, if you look at it, it makes a common sense test, then you can proceed further. So we have now completed the entire worksheet on the investment detail. I will complete the worksheet summary in the next video. Thanks for your attention.